When we perform a series of two or more transformations, we call this process finding a composition of transformations. We're not going to follow any new rules, we're just going to do multiple rules in a sequence. So for example, let's take a look at this first example. We're given coordinates for a preimage and they give us two transformations to follow. The first one they ask us to do is a translation, a slide. So let's go ahead and take our preimage coordinates and apply this rule to figure out where my first image is going to end up. We'll call our first image, we'll label it A prime as we've done before. So my rule says to subtract 7 from the x coordinate, so 3 minus 7 gets me negative 4. And then in our rule, when there's just a y by itself, that means keep the y alone, or if it helps you, you can do a little plus 0 at the end, which again would keep it the same. So our y coordinate stays the same, so 2 in this case. All right, let's repeat that for b. B prime, we'll subtract 7 from the x coordinate and get negative 1, and keep the y coordinate the same. And for c prime, again, subtract 7 from the x and leave the y coordinate the same. So there's where my first image ends up. Now, I'll graph this one at the end, so let's just go ahead and find the coordinates of our second image. If you have colors, this is a great one to color coordinate. So our second rule is to do a reflection, and this time they want us to reflect over the x-axis. So taking a look at my notes or my little book, I can see that our x-axis rule was A, and then opposite of b. In other words, keep the first coordinate the same and change the sign of the second coordinate. Now, this is really important. We want to make sure to find image 2, we use the coordinates from image 1. Just like to find image 1, we use the pre-image coordinates. So we're sort of working our way down the line. We're not going back to the original pre-image coordinates. We want to apply this series of transformations. So each time we're using only the column before in this chart to stay organized. So anyway, for image 2, I'm now going to call this a double prime because it's my second image. And again, I'm using the coordinates from this part, the previous image, not the original coordinates. So my rule is to keep the first coordinate the same and change the sign of the second. So a double prime should end up at negative 4, negative 2 once I reflect it. And in a moment we'll graph it to see that this indeed is where it's supposed to be. It looks like it's reflected over the x-axis. B double prime should be located at negative 1. And then I'll change the side of my second coordinate, so negative 3. And finally, C double prime should be located at 0, negative 1. So what I want to do, or what I want you guys to do, is pause the video. I'm going to real quick graph these three and see that yes, the transformations do what they say. They first translate it and then reflect it. So pause the video, and you can see once you replay it, you can see my graph pop up as well. So there I can see my first image was translated 7 to the left, and my second image was reflected from the blue triangle. So I've done two transformations. That's what we call a composition of transformations. My figure has ended up has been moved two different ways, but is still congruent to the original. Here's another example I want to take a look at. This time I want you to try the entire thing all the way through. So I'll give you the first couple rules if you don't have them. Otherwise you should have them in your notes or your little book. Then I want you to pause the video, find the coordinates after doing these two transformations, and then graph as well. If you let the video play through, my work will pop up. Those rules, if you need them, reflecting over the y-axis this time. The rule is opposite A, comma B. And then secondly, this time we want to do a rotation of 270 degrees. That rule is B, comma, opposite A. But again, hopefully you have that in your little book or in your notes. So again, pause the video, try this one all the way through. So there are my coordinates. Hopefully you ended up with the same coordinates, and here's my graph popping up. So there's the reflection of the first original pre-image, and then taking that image and rotating it 270 degrees ended up right there. If you didn't get that, go ahead and ask me in class or double check your work. Finally, what I want to do real quick is I just want to investigate whether or not the order of the transformations, what order we do them in, whether that matters or not. We've already answered this first question. Yes, the original image, or the original pre-image and our image, they are always congruent to each other as long as we stick with translations, reflections, and rotations. They're always congruent. But the second question is, does the order matter? So what I've done was I've taken the same 3 points that we dealt with last time, and I've just switched the order of the two rules. This time we'll rotate first and then reflect. And so what I want to do is investigate real quick whether this makes a difference or not. So we really don't need to do all 3 points. We can just test the first one and see if it ends up in the same location, I suppose. So let's go ahead and do our 270 rule. Our 270 rule, recall, is to do B opposite A. So switch the order and then change the sign of the number in back. So doing that rule first, our prime ends up at the coordinate -3, -1. If I then apply the second rule, the reflection, that rule, recall, was to do the opposite of A, comma B. So from where we left off, remember we're not going back to the original, I'm going to call this R double prime. If I switch the sign of the number in front, I get +3, and keep the number in back the same, I get -1. So doing the rule in this order gets me R prime, or R double prime at 3, -1. If you recall, or if you look back in your notes, our previous R prime was located at -3, +1, not at all in the same location. So to answer this question then, does the order matter? Yes, it does. If I do my transformations in a different order, I may end up with a different image when I'm done. So make sure that you do these in the order they are given to you.